Don's going to tell you about the cool stuff he does about origin of life and other things. So with that, now that everyone's got beer, everyone's happy, hand it over to Don.
Thank you. And thanks, Megan. I'm sorry about breaking your computer in the intermission. So anyone watching on the Google Plus stream, I messed it up for you guys. Sorry about that. All right, I want to talk about the origin of life and how it's related to astronomy. Like Megan said, I'm also not really an astronomer. I'm trained as a chemist with an interest in biology and ended up in an astronomy department. So I do a whole bunch of things that are sort of related. But the central question in all my research and my interest is, where did life come from? And what is life really? Before we can talk about where life came from, you have to think about what life really is. So, what is life? I think this is a very clarifying picture. There's a ridiculously muscular person up here, and it's zoomed in by steps of about a few orders of magnitude. You zoom in on the skin, and you see a bunch of cells, and you see organelles, and a membrane, and a molecule. So my first question to you guys is, where do you think that life sits? At which level? Is it naked man up here? Is it this is a molecule? This is a protein? What do you think is the thing that holds life?
Smaller than that.
It's probably not the molecule. A molecule is just a thing. It's not. It doesn't. Molecule is the basis for all substance around us. Everything except light, basically, is a molecule. Is matter, and matter itself is not alive because there's non-living matter. There's living matter. So somewhere along the line, things become alive. This is a membrane, it's part of a cell. This is an organelle, which is a compartment in a cell. This is a cell. I think here is where life starts. And so at a few microns, 10 micron size is a cell, and the cell is the unit of life. It's the the one in the thing that you call living. If you go up from that, it's a bunch of cells together. It becomes a skin, becomes an organ, becomes a human being, and we call humans alive, and we call animals alive, and plants alive. Which a part of that, if you were to take a human apart, it wouldn't be alive anymore, but the cells would still be living. So that's where life sits on that. That's the level, the size we're talking about. All right. So moving on from that, we'll do a little experiment, and it's a little pop quiz. So what do you think is living? Is a bacteria? Is that alive? Yes. Okay. Sounding yes. Yes. It's a single cell organism. It's one cell that by itself is an entire organism, and it's definitely alive. All right. What about DNA? DNA? No. No. Oh, we got a counter vote here. Kind of being countered. All right. Doesn't matter. The majority here votes for no. It shouldn't prevent you from saying no. It's a molecule. DNA is one single molecule, and it consists of many subunits. But it's one molecule, and the molecule by itself is not alive. It's a part of a living cell. Now it gets a little trickier. What about a virus?
In the middle. Yes.
Yes? No? In the middle? I hear some yeses, I hear some no's. It's a bit in the middle. I would say no. I would say no because it has many things that a cell has. It has, not every, it has a lot of the same components as the bacteria, but it needs a living thing to procreate. By itself, a virus does nothing. It only does something when it enters a cell, a living thing. Well, on, but you could say, we need living things as well. We eat, pork and lettuce and other living things. But we digest it, we break it apart in components, and use that for sustenance. That's not the same thing as needing an entire living cell to do its function. It needs a living thing to be alive.
So you could term that as a symbiotic relationship.
It's not symbiotic because it's actually parasitic.
Because it's parasitic.
I guess that depends on the virus. There could be symbiotic viruses, but I'm not a biologist, so it gets a little tricky here. But in general, viruses are considered not alive until they enter a host, when they take over the machinery of the host. But it's certainly a gray area.
So I guess the definition is what is life? What do you define life as?
That's what we're getting to.
Because I'm Star Trek. Right?
There's definitely a lot of gray area in the question. But the question here is, what is life? And the answer is there's a lot of gray area, and we get to that in a minute. Last one in the pub quiz. The crazy scientist. Okay, don't answer that. Don't answer that. Don't answer that. All right. So what is life? I think a good place to start to answer questions, look it up in the dictionary. Oxford English Dictionary says, conditional attribute of living or being alive, animate existence, opposed to death or inanimate existence. That sounds like circular reasoning to me. To be alive is to not be dead. That doesn't help very much. But I can rephrase it. Okay, we can say that a living thing is a thing with properties that keep it alive. If I take this here napkin and toss it out on the street, will it still be there in a while? Probably not. There's rain and wind. We're in Taipei, there's a lot of rain, and it will degrade over time. The elements will do its thing, and the paper will dissolve, and the molecules break apart. Everything turns to dust over, given long enough time. Even rocks and entire planets eventually fall apart. So a living thing is something that prevents that decay, at least for a little while. That's what living is to keep itself alive. And how does it do that? What tricks does a living organism use to stay alive? Well, all right. So something is missing here. I was going to say here. I don't know. There are three properties that show up here and don't. I'll just tell them to you. The first trick that a living being can use to stay alive is to use energy. Every living being must take up energy. We do that in the form of food, as chemical stored energy. And use that energy and also the building blocks of the food to make repairs and to prevent decay from happening. It's a constant battle against the thermodynamics of the universe. The second thing is, it's another trick, is if this napkin is going away, then it would be a trick to make a second napkin. Just in case this one decays anyway, then there would still be another napkin. That's what we call reproduction in biology. So you make a copy of yourself, and then even if this individual disappears, the copy will still continue to exist. So procreation is an essential part of living. And then the third point that is supposed to show up here on the screen is a central point for information storing. If you want to make a copy of something, it's good to have a blueprint, because you only need to make a copy of the blueprint and then give the blueprint to a little machine that can make copies, and you can make as many copies as you want. In biology, in living organisms, that blueprint is stored in the DNA. That's the blueprint of how to build another human being, or another bacteria, or another virus. So those are a few tricks that life is using to keep on living. So modern life um, what modern life looks like is in this form. So you have DNA, like I said, the information storage. There's RNA, which is the weaker cousin of DNA, and it's used for information transfer from the cell's nucleus to the rest of the cell. And then there are proteins, and proteins are the workhorses in life. And this is true for all life on Earth. So everything from a simple bacteria to a human being to an elephant, and even the three-toed sloth, they're all using the same mechanisms. It's based on exactly the same principles. So where did this come from? So now that we know sort of cursory overview of what life looks like, what it is, where did it come from? And what I'm interested in my research is prebiotic chemistry. And this first word, prebiotic, is very important because if you want to make life on a barren planet, you have to do all the chemistry without life being present. Currently, if you look around you in nature, everything is dominated by biochemistry, or molecular biology, however you want to call it. It's life dominated. Life makes other life. There are enzymes at work. There are enzymes that copy DNA that dictates what the next enzyme will look like. But we have to make this from scratch without the help of previously existing DNA and organisms and enzymes. So how do we do this? We need to go from smaller molecules that are present somehow to complex structures. For example, we hook up a bunch of amino acids into a long chain, and that's what we call a protein. We hook up a bunch of nucleobases and some sugars and phosphates, and we create RNA and DNA. Stick a bunch of fatty acids in water, and they automatically bundle together into micelles, and if you add more, they form membranes. So these are the basic components of a cell, and you can easily form them by simple chemical reactions. One example is amino acids. If you take in the lab a beaker with a solution of amino acids and you pour it over a layer of clay, and you look at what trickles down through the clay, at the other end comes out small proteins. The amino acids hook up, they bind together just by running over the clay. The clay acts as a catalyst for protein formation. That's all purely natural, and I mean prebiotic, not involving any other life, no help from already living things. So that's pretty remarkable. So we get these, we already know this from research, how to make bigger things out of really small molecules. And the next step, some magic, and then we have life. We don't really know what's happening in the intermediate, although we have some really good clues. The key word here is emergent properties. A lot of these bigger molecules tend to aggregate and form structures all by themselves. It's self-organizing chemistry. So what life is, basically, is a bunch of emergent properties on top of chemical reactions. It could be very disappointing for a lot of people. That's all that life is. What came first in these reactions is still up for debate. There's a bunch of really interesting sounding theories. There's the RNA world, there's the protein first world, there's DNA, there's membranes, all competing different theories, and we're still working on finding out what came first, in which order, and how what was formed, and how they all came together. So we went from living things to parts of living things to big complex structures down to small molecules. So naturally, the next question is, where did the small molecules come from? So these are the building blocks of life. And this is the famous Miller-Urey experiment, and I'm sure you've all heard about it. Previously, you start with a big bulb of gas. a mixture of gases. This is Stanley Miller and Carl Drury in the 1950s. They took a glass bulb, mixed in methane, ammonia, water, and hydrogen gas, pumped it around for a while, and had two electrodes with a voltage over them, creating sparks in the gas mixture, thereby simulating lightning strikes in an atmospheric cloud. And heated it up and cooled it down and let it sit for a couple of weeks. And at the end of that, there was a big black goo forming in this cold tap over here. And they took out the black goo and they analyzed it, and they found all kinds of interesting molecules, amino acids and sugars and fatty acids and all the good stuff you need to form life. So there you have it. There's the origin of life. It's primordial. This is what we now call a primordial soup. And it's how you go from small molecules that are in the atmosphere to bigger prebiotic molecules, and they can link up to big polymers and eventually form life. It's not that simple, unfortunately. For one, this assumes that the atmosphere consists for a large amount of reduced molecules. That means methane. Carbon is in the form of methane, and nitrogen is in the form of ammonia. And we think that the atmosphere of the Earth may never have that much of these reduced molecules in the atmosphere. It was always pretty neutral or oxidizing. So carbon would be CO2, and nitrogen would be N2, or molecular nitrogen, much like the atmosphere is these days. So if you repeat the experiment with the current atmosphere, absolutely nothing happens. If you stick in CO2 and nitrogen, and basically take a bunch of air and repeat this experiment, you get no results. That doesn't mean that the Miller-Urey experiment is wrong. It just means that you have to look for very specific places of where this could happen. And one of those places could be in the cloud of a volcano. If a volcano erupts, all these gases mentioned here, they do come out, and you have a big cloud there. Volcanoes also tend to trigger lightning, so nearby a volcano eruption, this Miller-Urey type synthesis could definitely take place. Another place that is a lot of interest to science these days is hydrothermal vents. Those are essentially volcanoes at the bottom of the ocean. And the pressure of the water is so high that the water doesn't boil, even though there's a volcano erupting right there, but there's a lot of interesting chemicals coming out of the Earth, and they create reactions, and all kinds of interesting molecules are found near those like vents. So those are good places to look, but there's more than that. And now we have to step back a little, away from the Earth, and hark back to Sundar's talk, and remember what Sundar was talking about, how you have big clouds of gas in molecular clouds in the interstellar medium, and those clouds collapse, form stars, but they don't just form stars, they also form